Bethel, and I am the director of the Afro-American Cultural Center at Yale, also known as the House. Oh, I'm sorry, webcam. My apologies. Hello, virtual people. And as I was saying, I am the director of the House, this big, beautiful, wonderful building that you're in today. I'm also assistant dean of Yale College and a Yale College alum from the class of 2011. So on behalf of my staff, I would like to welcome you all to our space. To tell you a little bit about the House is the first cultural center on Yale's campus, one of the first Black cultural centers in the nation, and the first Black cultural center of the Ivy League. It was founded in 1969 by our founders, whose pictures are on the wall, Don Ogilvy, Armstead Robinson, and Glenn D. Chabert. They were all Yale undergrads at the time. They founded the Black Student Alliance at Yale in 1967, and for 2 years worked with professors on campus and local New Haven activists to petition the university for a space for Black students to have a home away from home during their time on campus. Luckily and smartly, the Yale Corporation approved their petition in '69, and we were able to open our doors. For the past 54, almost 55 years, this space has been one of the leading places on campus, not just for Black students, but for all students to really feel at home, to feel welcomed and supported. It is also largely run by students. So I'm currently the only professional staff member of the House, and we have 50 student workers who help me with all of our programming, initiatives, events. Everything that you see in this building is in large part due to their ideas and their initiative. The House is the largest cultural center of the 4 cultural centers on Yale campus. It's 4 stories. So at the end of this event, please feel free to explore the building and see some of our amazing spaces beyond the founder's room that you're sitting in right now. We have our staff range from first years to seniors and a couple of graduate assistants, and they plan all of our events, including the 12 events that we have planned for Black History Month, which you can all see on our website. I realize that you are not here to hear about me or the House, but I want to make sure that you understand the history and the significance of the space that you're in today as we welcome our friends from the Lehrman Center to lead this amazing event. So welcome to the House. Please enjoy. All of my staff have on silver badges. If you have any questions about the space or would like a tour after this event, please feel free to ask one of the students. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and greetings. My name is Mira Debs, and I am the Executive Director of the Education Studies Program and one of the co-sponsors of the program this evening. And I'm going to be introducing our speaker, Daisha Brabham. The Education Studies Program is an interdisciplinary undergraduate program for students on campus, supporting research, policy, and practice in education. And we're really excited about Ruby Bridges coming as the speaker for the MLK event next week. I just wanted to make a note that today's event has been planned in part as a lead up to Ruby Bridges' talk, which will be next Wednesday, January 24th at 5:30. And advanced registration is required. So if you're interested in coming to that event, I think it will be full, but there is also the option to attend online. mlk.yale.edu is the website to sign up for that. I just also want to say a couple of thank yous. Thank you to Dean Bethel and her staff for sharing this beautiful space with us. Thank you also to Risa Nelson, the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility for the Yale University Library and Collections, and the Yale Martin Luther King Commemoration Committee for all of their support in organizing these events, and for all of the co-sponsors of the event today, Karen, Tamika, EJ, and EJ back in the back there, and Daisha from the Gilder Lehrman Center. Thank you to everybody for co-sponsoring this. I just want to make a brief announcement too in terms of Yale's policies on free expression. So Yale is committed to protecting free expression and peaceful dissent, but interfering with the speaker's ability to speak and the audience's ability to hear and see is not consistent with the university's free expression policy. So just please keep that in mind as our talk unfolds today. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Daisha Brabham, who is the Director of Education and Public Outreach at the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition here at Yale. Hang on a sec. I've got a little bit more to say about you. Since graduating from Southern Connecticut State University, and before that as a student who attended New Haven Public Schools, Daisha has worked in nearly every corner of the education landscape. She is a former social studies teacher who taught here in New Haven at Wilbercross High School and at ESUMS. She was a longtime educator in Windsor, where she was a teacher of the year at Windsor High School and pioneered teaching the Black and Latino Studies course. She is also an adjunct faculty member at Southern and a steering committee member of the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective. She received a Fulbright to pursue an MA in Public History from the Royal Holloway University in London, and she studied transnational Black resistance movements and Black feminist print culture there. There are clearly lots and lots of questions that we want to ask you and have you talk about just from those things alone. Today, she will be speaking about the story we tell ourselves, the long fight for Black public education, with an emphasis on this history in the Northeast region. So please join me in welcoming Daisha Brabham as our speaker.
All right, hi everyone. Thanks for traveling out in the snow. Just a quick check. I just want to make sure everyone's good online. So I'm really excited to be here and no less to give this talk in such a monumental space on Yale's campus and being in the house. And just this building, the land, just how this building kind of is a product of activism, and to be able to share some stories with you here today. As was said, I was a social studies teacher, which means it's going to get real interactive. We're going to be talking and discussing and getting into dialogue today. And I also would love for us to, you know, chat and kind of think about how this history pertains to you in your context, your experiences. So next week we have Ruby Bridges coming to campus. I remember watching the Ruby Bridges story whenever I was young, watching that film and just how much it meant to see this little girl kind of like walking past this sea of different people. But what I'm going to be talking to you about today is how Ruby Bridges' story is really one story in a long history of Black activism. And I'm going to be talking to you about a little girl named Sarah, who also did a long walk. And I want to talk a little bit about how these two stories both kind of give us insights into Black organizing and the different ways in which Black organizing has manifested throughout time, the power of community, and what does it mean to organize together? How have Black people particularly helped us define our ideas of democracy and education? And then lastly, what is the role of ordinary people in our society, right? So that's what I want us to talk about today. But like I said, I'm a teacher, so I'm not above cold calling. I'm not gonna do some cold calls, but what I'm gonna have us do is just give some guesses. So I'm gonna ask some questions just to get us started, to get us comfortable talking with each other. And I want us to start off with this question. What year was the first public school opened in the US? So go ahead and talk with the person who's next to you, maybe write down for the people in the chat, maybe you can go ahead and answer this in the Q&A section. But what year do you think the first public school was opened in the US? And for my online people, don't try and check Google before you get on the chat, okay? All right, once everyone, for my in-person folks, what I'm gonna have you all do is once you come up with your answer, write it on the back of the paper and then go ahead and stick it up. Let's try and see who's the most confident in their answer. We have our online people who are sharing out. So we've got 1700s. What are you getting on the screen? Right now on screen, we're getting 1870, 1866, 1600s, 1797, 1600-ish. We are all over the place. Maybe 1800s, I'm taking a wild guess because many people dislike the idea of public schools. We have a winner, Karen Du Bois Walton, online. The first school actually is originated in Boston, and that is the Boston Latin School. Which is still open, by the way. 1635. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's add on to this, okay? Now this one's a little bit more tricky. How about the first year of the first Black public school opened in the US? And you can go ahead and turn your papers on the side. Like I said, we can try and be as hybrid as possible. 1866. 1750. 1800s. I see some people thinking really intensely. They're like, wait, what is it? I don't know. 1820? Okay, we got something in the back. All right, so the answer is a little complicated, right? We're still not sure. I will say I did this talk, a similar talk with some New Haven students, and they said 1980. And I was like, whoa, but then I realized, like, actually, that's a while for you. So I kind of understand. But the answer is it really depends on where you're looking, right? If you put this into Google, which is exactly what I did on the slide here, you'll see in 1870 that there's the Dunbar High School, which is considered the first Black public high school, which comes in the aftermath of Reconstruction. If you type into Google, what is the first Black school in New Haven, you'll get the first Black school was called the Artisan Street School, which was established in 1811 on Artisan Street, or the Gulf Street School in 1864, right? But all of these kind of are connected, right? When we're trying to kind of go back to our timeline, we know that slavery ends in 1865, Reconstruction begins, and then, okay, now we're gonna keep going through Reconstruction. But the actual answer is that Black education really has a long history, going all the way back to 1731. Even further back, right? Organized examples of education, whether that be requiring enslaved African Americans to read the Bible or vice versa. But what I actually want to talk about a little bit today is how these schools or how Black education really takes center after the American Revolution, right? When we think about post-Revolutionary War education, and to me, when I think kind of in doing this and looking at the research, one of the schools that really stands out to me is the New York African Free School, which was established in 1794 by the Manumission Society. This was created by members of a Manumission Society. Some of them were slave owners, but who had an idea that eventually slavery might gradually come to an end. But they believed in education and freedom's power to transform the country. And so they established this school, which is established in 1794, and it's originally a one-room space that houses around 40 students. Now, before I get into this, we're gonna jump around a little bit because I think that it's really important to set the context to why these schools are opened in the first place. And in order to do that, and in order to understand the context of Black education or Black public education in the Northeast in particular, to me, there are these four things that we really have to see working at play here. The first thing is you have the conversation of slavery, which is obvious, right? And this is the reason why I think sometimes we don't necessarily have language or really understand this time period is because a lot of people just think all African Americans were enslaved during this time period. When I say everyone, I'm talking more about students, right? My high school students, that's what a lot of them think. They don't necessarily have a history or a historical context of free Black people in the North. But you have the abolition of slavery, which is at the forefront, right? This is the aftermath of the Revolutionary War. We're starting to see the language of democracy and freedom come about, and Black people are like, how does that apply to us? You also have the racial ideology of the time, white supremacy, right? Who is deserving of freedom? Who's not? Who is this American quote unquote dream going to include and who is it not? And so you have these questions regarding Black people, but then on the other side, you also have this rise of egalitarian ideals, right? You have the Declaration of Independence. We just fought a Revolutionary War. We're establishing a democracy. And with that, you also have the rise of common schools or the expansion of public education. We're starting to see public schools arise all in the North of all these children enrolling in schools. And so to understand these things at play, or to understand the New York Free African School, you really have to understand these four things at odds with each other. And one of my favorite ways to teach this, like I was said in the bio, I teach at Southern Connecticut State University. And my favorite way to talk about this with undergrads is by looking at Benjamin Banneker and Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson, I'm sure a lot of us know him, writer of the Declaration of Independence, one of our big founding fathers. And on the right here, you have Benjamin Banneker, who was an astronomer, a mathematician, creates an almanac, and was a very respected thinker during this time period. And what I really find interesting about how these two men intersect is that they intersect through a letter in which Benjamin Banneker writes to Thomas Jefferson because he has some questions. He's like, I have some questions for you. And so I'm just going to read, I'm going to paraphrase a lot. This is a long document, but I'm just going to paraphrase some of the things that really stick out to me. So he starts off this letter and he encloses a copy of his almanac. And he says, I suppose it is a truth too well attested to you, to need proof here that we are a race of beings who have long labored under abuse and censure of the world, that we have long been looked upon with the eye of contempt, and that we have been considered rather as brutish than human, and scarcely capable of mental endowments, right? He's saying this is kind of the condition in which that has been placed on us. Right? And it's interesting because he writes to Thomas Jefferson because he thinks that he will be sympathetic to his cause. And so he continues on the letter and says, if my inclination is true, if my thought that you are or may be sympathetic to our cause is true, if this is founded in truth, I will apprehend you readily to embrace every opportunity to eradicate that train of absurd and false ideas and opinions, which so generally prevails with respect to us. And that your sentiments concurrent with mine, which are that one universal Father hath given being to us all, and that he hath not only made us all one flesh, and afforded us the same sensations, and endowed us with all the same faculties. And this is a really, 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 really long letter, right? I'm really paraphrasing here, which is why sometimes my undergrads don't like to read it all. But they love reading Thomas Jefferson's letter. And the reason why, this is basically it. Right? He kind of responds back. He says, listen, I thank you sincerely for your letter and the almanac which it contained. He says, listen, nobody more than me wishes to see the proofs that you're talking about. No one more than me wants to see that Black people are capable of learning, that the talents are equal to those of the talents of other men, and that the appearance of them is owing merely to the degraded condition of their existence, both in Africa and in America. And I can add with truth that nobody wishes more ardently to see a good system commenced for raising the condition both of their body and mind to what it ought to be. So that's how he responds back. He also says, oh, I'm going to send your almanac to a couple of people. Now it's really interesting because this letter ends up being printed in the newspapers because, you know, and kind of uses a weapon to Thomas Jefferson, like, oh, maybe he's an abolitionist, maybe, right? And he's upset about this. And this is what's really funny. Years later after, this is written in 1791. Years later, Thomas Jefferson responds back to a friend. He's writing to his friend Joel Barlow, which he says, I have a long letter from Banneker, which showed him to have very common mind, right? This guy really wasn't all that. He probably was aided by somebody else in producing this almanac. And he said, I wrote to you as I have done with a very soft answer. Nothing was or is farther from my intentions to enlist myself as a champion of a fixed opinion, right? I don't even know about this, if Black people actually have the capabilities of others. And what's really interesting is he signs off with St. Domingo will in time throw light on this question. St. Domingo meaning the Haitian Revolution. And I think in this correspondence, we're seeing something at play here, right? We're seeing the idea of Black people's capability for freedom being intertwined with the abolition movement. Now, when I show this to my students, the first thing they say is, you know, Miss, Thomas Jefferson's kind of fake, you know? He's like sending this different letter years later after, but it kind of shows like, again, how are people interpreting this history? And so this is the context, and just one other piece, like I said, So in the context of this conversation of abolition and Black people's capabilities, you also have the rise of public education. This is a really awesome book that I recommend you all read. This is Yohan Neems. He came to the GLC, or the Gilder Lehrman Center, about a year ago. So if you're interested in looking at how these themes are tied in, I would read his book. But he talks about how this common school movement was really tied in with the idea of religion, but also the pursuit of happiness and citizenship, and how public education represents that. And this is the context in which the New York African Free School is created. This is the backdrop in which all of these students who are originally housed in a one-room space of 40 students, this is the context in which they're going to school to learn, but with also the weight of, I'm doing this because it stands to, I'm gonna help move these conversations. And you see this, like James McCune Smith, a graduate of the New York African Free School, who went on to be an ardent abolitionist, writes, so deeply did they feel for the want of education in themselves that they would run all risks, make all sacrifice to secure it. This is the context in which these schools are, these students are entering this building. You know, just out of curiosity, again, because I know I've been talking for a little bit, how many of you are first generation or the first person in your family to attend college? Right? That's kind of what I imagine, like, just to kind of put it into context of what that would have felt like for these graduates, right? Who go on to do amazing things. You have Alexander Crummell, who was recently just awarded his degree from Yale. You have James McCune Smith, Charles Reason, Ira Aldridge, Samuel Ward, all of these amazing people who go on to be ardent abolitionists and make real changes in their community. And so Black education starts off as a transformative force in our country. It's important, specifically in the Northeast, for these free African Americans to be able to make change in their communities. And with that transformation, you see a backlash, as we almost always do, right? The destruction of the plan for the 1831 Black College here in New Haven, which we'll learn a lot more about. There's a really awesome documentary by Charles Warner and Tobias, which will detail the story of how it plays out in New Haven. So you have the destruction of this Black college, again, and then you also have the Prudence Crandall story happening in Canterbury, in which this woman opens up her school to Black girls, and the school is subsequently destroyed. And you have legislation that's passed to prevent Black schools from intermingling. And so this is the context that brings us to Sarah, the little girl that I was telling you about at the beginning of this talk. And so we jumped around a little bit. And so what I want to do is just jump finally to Boston, in which you have this fight to integrate schools. Now, ABL Smith School was originally opened in 1798. Again, you have a lot of these schools that are popping up. It's not just the New York African School, it's schools in New Hampshire, it's schools in Rhode Island. There's a lot of different schools in different areas. But it opens in 1798, and it's endowed by actually a white merchant by the name of ABL Smith. So it's endowed. And shortly after it's endowed, it becomes the first subsidized public school. So it's subsidized by the city of Boston in 1816. And by 1836, the school had 100 students and a predominantly white faculty. Now, what we know about this school is that it operated in a way that many of these schools operated in, under low funding, not a lot of support. And it also was led by white leadership, which was not necessarily always willing to work with Black parents, right? Sending them letters home saying, hey, we noticed that our graduates are not necessarily always doing the best when they go home to you. But nonetheless, it still operates. But you start to see in the 1830s this growing push of people saying, we need to close this school down and we should have access to the public schools. Not because we want access just to be able to go to integrated schools or white public schools, but because of the money and the funding that these schools are able to receive, the access to the resources that they need to learn. And one of the students who goes to the school is a man by the name of William Cooper Nell. And it's really interesting because he understands the deep disinvestment that he's seeing in these desegregated schools. He's a graduate of one. And he's looking at it and he's like, I'm determined to close this school down. And so you see the Black community, some who are in favor of integrated schools, some who are not. I'm not going to make it seem like everyone was in alignment, but there is a push to integrate the schools. And they go on and they write petitions to the school board committee. They write and they say, we realize that the establishment of these colored schools, these exclusive schools for us, is a deep insult to us. And we want these schools to be integrated. And they even go on to write a minority report. And what's really interesting in this minority report is they posit so many ideas about democracy and how it ties back to education and their role in it. But they also detail the funding inequities that they see. White public schools were able to purchase books with a budget of up to $550, while the Smith School had access to one volume at $3, right? Let me ask you a question, raise your hand, just out of curiosity. How many of you all had textbooks when you were in school? I wonder and ask the question, if you ask your students or people you know who are in high school now, how many of them do? Not many, right? Which is, again, partly because of the advent of technology, but also partly because some school districts can't afford them, right? Which shows this, again, this is 1842 that people are writing in this report. And unfortunately, the school committee doesn't necessarily respond well to this. They say, listen, the schools are maintained. This is your school. We're not going to integrate it, and tough stuff. And they say, actually, boldly, if you have a problem with this, go to the legislator. And someone takes them up on it. And that's the father of 5-year-old Sarah Roberts. Now, we don't have any pictures of little Sarah. But what we know about her is that she's 5 years old, and she's the daughter of Benjamin Roberts, who was actually the first printer in Massachusetts. First Black printer in Massachusetts. And Benjamin Roberts was actually a graduate, similar to William Cooper now, of these schools. So again, he sees just the degrading fashion in which these schools are run. And he's upset because his daughter has to walk past 5 white schools to get to her school at ABL Smith. And you can look into more of her case, but you know, it's so interesting. He's able to enroll her, then he's not able to enroll her. But then eventually, the school district says, no, she cannot be going to a white school. She needs to go to ABL Smith School. And so he decides to sue the school district. And he enrolls, or to bring to his cause, brings Robert Morris, who's one of Massachusetts, one of the first Black lawyers, who also then recruits Charles Sumner, who's an abolitionist and lawyer. And these two men together go and they fight about this case. They go and sue the school district, and they say, listen, we're not, and what's interesting about them is that they don't actually go off of the evidence that's in the minority report. What they actually do is they sue based off of this 1845 statute, which says that any child unlawfully excluded from public school instruction in this Commonwealth shall recover damages, therefore, in action on one case to be brought in name of said child. So they sue based on this thing that says, if you try and take a student out of this public school, you can be sued. So we're going to sue you. And they bring it to the case. They bring it to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and it is subsequently shot down. The committee says, the committee has come to the conclusion that the good of both classes of school will be best promoted by maintaining the separate primary schools for colored and for white children, and we can perceive no ground to doubt that this is the honest result of their experience and their judgment. So the case is shot down, right? And that's kind of where you would think that story would end, right? But what I find so beautiful about the story is that it doesn't end there. The community comes back together and says, no, we're going to continue to organize. And that fight is largely upheld by, oh, and I should mention that that case ruling partly helps to inspire or go on to influence the founding of Plessy versus Ferguson, which obviously we know separate but equal. But the fight continues on, and it's largely upheld by these Black women, the boycotting mothers, one of which is a really ardent, famous abolitionist by the name of Eunice R. Davis. These boycotting mothers say, you know what, if you don't want to educate my kid in these segregated schools, I'm gonna take my kid out of here. And so attendance numbers start to drop. And then you start to see some change. And when they're not educating their kids at these schools, they open protest schools. They're like, we're gonna get this done. And actually, William Cooper now writes in the Liberator years later that he credited these Black women for keeping the flame alive in the dark hours of the struggle when some men despaired of victory, right? And eventually, in 1855, the school district, or Massachusetts, decides to desegregate its schools. And shortly after, Smith School is closed. And I found this so beautiful that William Cooper now later writes that he saw this, he said, I saw from my window a boy passing the exclusive Smith School where he had been a pupil, and raising his hands, he exclaimed to his companions, goodbye forever, colored school. Tomorrow, we're like all the other Boston boys. And so what this story tells us is that this history, Ruby Bridges is just one child in this long history, in this fight to secure access to public education. And that Black organizing, youth organizing, Black women specifically organizing led this charge. William Cooper now also goes on later to say that truth enjoins upon me the pleasing duty of acknowledging to the women and the children also is the cause especially indebted for success. That the children and the women of this movement are indebted. We are indebted of this cause. And this continues on through Reconstruction. As historian James D. Anderson says, that students and teachers and Black people are some of the first Southerners to campaign for state-supported education, using the backdrop and the framework of decades, really decades worth of organizing that had occurred. And this continues on. This is Bell Hooks. This is someone who deeply inspired my work as an educator, who went on to say in her book, Teaching to Transgress, that almost all of our teachers at Booker T. Washington were Black women. They were committed to nurturing intellect so that we would become scholars, thinkers, culture workers, Black folks who use our minds. And we learned early that our devotion to learning, a fundamental way to resist every strategy of white racist colonization. Again, that similar story that we get from the people who came before them, right? The Alexander Crummels, the Jane McCune Smith, that the education is transformative, it has power. But separate versus equal was and still is not necessarily applied today. Now, I'm not going to get so much into Brown versus Board because I'm going to let Ruby Bridges tell that story, and I think a lot of us kind of are familiar with it. But I think what's really important is, what are the stories or the trends that we can take from this story or this history? What is the aftermath of Brown versus Board? It's important to kind of recognize that when Ruby Bridges comes here next week, she's coming to a segregated state. Just take that in. She's coming to a segregated state. Brown versus Board has not yet been fully realized. And in order to do that, you have to trace back and go back to what was the aftermath of it. This is Bell Hooks, who continues on to say, in her book, Teaching to Transgress, that school changed utterly with racial integration. Gone was the zeal to transform our minds and beings that characterize teachers and their pedagogical practices in our all-Black schools. Knowledge was suddenly about information only. It had no relation to how one lived, behaved. It was no longer connected to the anti-racist struggle. Bused to white schools, we soon learned that obedience and not a zealous will to learn was what was expected of us. And too much eagerness could easily be seen as a threat to white authority, right? And it's interesting, when I showed this to students in New Haven, they can identify with that, of what that feels like. Now, is the lesson here that integration was a bad thing? No, but it means that it's not yet fully realized, right? And to some extent, it's a dream unrealized. And so to close this out before we kind of start the Q&A and get into some discussions, I want to just kind of think about what is this history supposed to inform us? How does this instruct our present? So as I said, CT is segregated. According to Connecticut Public School, according to a report, Connecticut Public Schools are highly segregated, with most students attending a district where more than 75% of the students are white, or a district where more than 75% of the students are students of color. And a 2020 report by the School and State Finance Project found that there's a $639 million funding gap between districts with students of color populations and of at least 25% and districts with white student populations greater than 75%. And I was a teacher, they feel that. That's felt in terms of what you have access to. How many schools in New Haven have access to a librarian? How many of these schools actually have teaching vacancies, right? So this is deeply felt. And so the question is, how do we solve it? How do we continue to realize this dream? And to me, I think you have to go back to the story of Ruby and Sarah, of the power of community, the power of organizing together, the power of defining what democracy means to us, and the power of ordinary people. Because Sarah, little Sarah, who also, just a kind of fun fact, Sarah actually moved after she married and actually moved to New Haven. And this is where she died in 1896. I'm gonna try and go. We have to see if she's buried at Grove Street Cemetery, because that would just be too powerful. But what's interesting about this, again, is that Sarah and Ruby were just ordinary people. And this is what kind of I came across in this book about Sarah's Long Walk, where this author says, how does the ordinary person find themselves in the history? And the question I'm asking for us all today is, where will we find ourselves in history? Right? We're all ordinary people. So what are we going to do to organize and get involved? And to me, when I think of this, I think the youth are going to lead the way, right? Whether that be in the Black and Brown, the Black students who went to the Capitol and testified to ensure that Black and Latino history was taught, the students who speak out about policing in schools, that they're going to be the ones who lead the way. So I just gave you a lot of history and talked a lot. So what I want us to do is kind of talk together and talk a little bit, what did you know, what didn't you know, and we'll come back for Q&A, okay? All right, awesome. And then for people online, you can also just kind of reflect and then write in the Q&A for some chat. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and come back to go ahead and get started. I don't know if anyone has any questions or just responses. Like I said, hopefully this can be a dialogue. Oh, yeah, sure.
And then sort of like, so people like skip and holding stuff here, and then it started again, I think off the floor, like, you think like that, and we back there and then stop talking about it. Just trying to like log out the really bad.
All right, let's come back together. I can answer, we can get into any questions or thoughts. And we have some comments from the chat. So I'll go ahead and start off with our online audience, just because they haven't had the chance to dialogue together. They're kind of just saying, so let's go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and just read some of their kind of like comments. One person said, many people raised in the South say they were happy for segregated schools because they had Black teachers who cared about them and high expectations for students. I grew up in Boston segregated schools where my friends in Roxbury had old beat up books, and in my mostly white neighborhood, we had new books. High expectations is a key in student success, and it was the reason behind Amistad. And I think that's really important just because, you know, one thing from looking in the arguments in the is from the Boston movement to integrate the schools, is that not all Black parents are really on board with this idea of sending their students to these integrated schools, right? In the same way that there are many reluctant parents, as you'll hear from Ruby Bridges, her father and other people in her community were very reluctant to have her join onto the school, in part because, again, there's not a lot of trust, right? And still, that's a big factor to play in terms of how Black parents are treated in education. Are they respected? Are they cared for? Are they collaborated with, right? I already said that in some of the documents that we see from these kind of free African schools, the documents that were sent out to parents, to me, somewhat resemble some of the documents that I've seen sent out to parents today. Of, you know, we know what we're doing, right? It's not a partnership. It's not in collaboration. So I definitely can see that. And again, thinking about just the difference in terms of access to resources, you know, redlining obviously is playing a big role here. Just how we fund education is playing a big role here, which, you know, most of us are familiar with. One person says, perhaps 15 years ago, a Black coworker who was also my dear friend shocked me by saying that in her son's school, they had completely out of date textbooks, which is true, right? I'll say I have never taught with a textbook in my 5 years of teaching. And for the first 2 years, that was because the schools could not afford them. Right? And the textbooks that were available were just completely out of date, and I wasn't gonna show those to the kids, right? And so that speaks to, or just, and just in my teaching education, I taught in three different districts and 4 different schools during my time as a history teacher, just the difference in terms of shifting from school to school, the access that you're able to get. Right? Whereas one school is like, yes, take your kids on field trips, do this, do that. And another school's like, listen, we can't afford that. So go on and show a YouTube video in your classroom, right? That's the most that they're going to be able to see. So that just speaks to kind of how we see this. One other person says, how can we fix this? How could we fix this so that this could be in African-American history schools that are churches and community centers where Black kids learn about their own history and culture? And I think a lot of this is, that's part of why the Black and Latino studies course is such a monumental win in this movement for accessing our schools, which is students being able to learn about this history, but also what do they learn about it, right? Is Sarah Roberts just going to be a multiple choice test question, or is Sarah Roberts going to be instructive to how these students show up and how they organize, right? So it's not just about teaching the history, it's also teaching the action, it's teaching the process. One more person said, could you speak more about the role of women such as mothers, sisters throughout in regards to the Black school movement and non-segregation, following up from what you said about mothers boycotting and protesting, taking their children out of existing schools? Yeah, that's one thing that I was really interested in is the Eunice Davis. There's about four women who are mentioned in the Liberator who were attending these meetings to help segregate the schools. But what we do know about these women is that they were incredibly involved in the movement. And actually, when schools are integrated, what we do know is that these mothers escorted their children directly to the integrated school to make sure that they arrived safely, that they arrived okay, right? And that history of Black mothers in this movement and subsequently, right? That's kind of more of the history that I was aware of just how many Black women become educators after Reconstruction and continue that tradition well on. That's part of why I joined the classroom as a Black woman, right, is because I felt that I was following in this long history of Black women educators. And just kudos to all the Black women who do still come in, who are members of leadership, right? I've never not actually had a Black woman principal or had a Black woman superior that I could go to talk about my experiences in the classroom and what that does, right? When we think about equity and how that shows up. I'm gonna go ahead. So let's maybe turn to the in-person groups. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions that they can share. I can move the mic around.
Well, I'm gonna out this gentleman here.
Oh, no.
I was part of the Yonkers desegregation. I was part of Yonkers desegregation. Yonkers is the 4th largest in New York State. I was a parent. I would say I'm part of a mixed race family. My husband, at the time, Irish and Italian. Me, everything in the kitchen sink, Black and Ghanese and everything. Back Afro-Caribbean, Latin American. So we had a problem in our areas. Yonkers segregated on quadrants. Northwest were affluent Black people, from down south with the Negro migration north. Southwest, depressed immigrants, and everybody from all over the world. And the other parts were more affluent. We had schools that were run with public funds like private schools. One was called Little House on the Prairie, and our children did not have access. Our children are listed by race. When you enroll your child, you must put down a race, even if the child is more than one race. One Black parent, you're number 3. White, number 5. Hispanic, number 4. 2 would be Asian and 1 would be Native American. And we had a quota. So if they determined that too many Black students were in a particular school, the talented and gifted, or from perils, then your child could not go. And so we fought. I fought as a parent, and then we had a problem when Black people tried to work in the district. We took those civil service tests, and we were not called. I took the civil service test, I took it in White Plains, I took it in Yonkers, right? I was told that one letter said I failed the test, and one said I passed. So I brought up my White Plains score. Top 3 in the county. They had to call me. I was last hired, and consequently 10 for me to be first 5. We fought with now Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins, Simra Brandon, but this gentleman was boss, just like my daughter. And it's a shame that in the 80s, the 70s, and 80s, still we have busing. So I experienced it as a parent. My daughter, who works at Yale now, happily, Yonkers Public Schools, and Connecticut schools, but it was a fact. And as a Black mother, I wasn't taking it. Because I'm one of those parents, yes, we get go to bed, and we fought through the law. Equal, appropriate, and equitable opportunity to shine in your own neighborhood. Amen? That's it, amen to that. So this is meaningful to me, and I do teach African American Life. Consequently, became a teacher and a professor, and stayed in education, volunteered, and like you, got involved. Talk is cheap, but your feet and your brain to use, and you make a change.
Yeah.
Now, I met this gentleman, lovely, he was bused 70s. Prior to me and others fighting, he was bused, and he can speak on his reasons, but he chooses to shy. But he is part of the busing process here in Connecticut.
Yeah, and there's many, right? There's many ordinary people and ordinary pioneers who were a part of that specific kind of like experience in Connecticut. I just want to check one more time. It looks like we have one more question. Yeah, so this was just when we're talking about their experiences. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts that they want to share?
Somebody say, can you please sum up the questions, comments made by the audience?
Yeah. I think that was after. I think that was after because they couldn't hear. Okay, so I want to thank everyone. Like I said, this was a pre kind of talk before Ruby Bridges comes here. I'm so excited for this giant who I watched on HBO on the big TV, not the flat one. When I watched that movie, I'm really excited for her to come, and really thank you all for coming out tonight. And I just leave you off with this. I just want to kind of posit this. We, myself, the group that I'm a part of, the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective, the New Haven Federation for Teachers, the AFT, and the CA, a couple of years ago, crafted an Educator's Bill of Rights. And I'm gonna go ahead and share that out with all the people who are the participants today, just to kind of look at, again, how does that type of organizing or working together help to improve our schools? An Educator Bill of Rights should be a student Bill of Rights. Right? What are the conditions that teachers need? What are the conditions that our schools need for our students to fully thrive and to really have access to the right that we are guaranteed by the law? And so thank you all for coming out tonight, and all the in-person people. Obviously, we still have food, and I want to thank our hybrid audience as well.